Hello, everyone. Mike Cully with the League of Oregon Cities. We put you all into listen-only mode, so that does away with the wood shop and the airplanes and the dogs. So you're all in listen-only mode. This is presenter mode. This is where you'll be hearing all of us. When it's time to go to question and answers, and I'm sure there will be a number of those today, we'll switch you back into Q&A mode. And the operator will prompt you as to how to virtually raise your hand and ask questions. So as is traditional, we will start at 10:05 this morning. We do that because we have a large volume of folks that are calling in from all across the state. Our numbers last week exceeded about 430 participants on this call, which is great. So that tells us that people are getting a lot of good information out of this. And we continue to try to build on that weekly. This week is going to be a great call, I think, with a lot of information. We will probably go past the 11 o'clock hour on this one, depending on the volume of questions. We don't want to ignore those. And then we will be continuing to do this weekly, and I think you'll see a little shift going from the public health crisis with more focus and emphasis on the economic recovery and the economic situation here in the state. So stick with us. We have about, according to my watch, if I can get my watch to work, about 3 minutes left until we start at 10:05. Just want to say again, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. All participants are in listen-only mode at this point. We will start in about 2 minutes. We have a pretty full agenda. As I mentioned earlier, I expect this call to probably run past the 11 o'clock hour. Got some great information, relevant information for you, and I know you have questions for us as well. There is a lot going on, and it is a minute-to-minute kind of situation here with changes coming at us right and left. So I have 1 minute until we get going here. Well, good morning, everyone. It's 10:05. I want to thank you, first of all, for joining us. This is our fourth weekly call of this nature. It's unfortunate that we have to go through this, but we're glad to be doing it. As you know, all participants now, you're all in listen-only mode. I have scheduled today's call to end at about 10:30, I think, which is longer than previous calls. That's because we have a lot of information to pass along to you, and again, I know you have a lot of questions for us as well. Again, we've had over 430 participants on this call weekly, so we've gotten a lot of questions. A lot of the questions have been similar, and we've consolidated a lot of that. Many of your questions have been given to our presenters in advance of this call so that they can address them either directly through their presentations, or we'll be prepared to answer them when we go into question and answer mode. It's really no secret, I think we all know, that we're dealing with now a crisis on two fronts. This is every bit a public health emergency as it is an economic one. I think you've all probably seen that the unemployment, folks filing for unemployment claims here in Oregon were at 269,000 just last week, in the past 3 weeks. 6.6 million nationwide. So the levels are blowing past the Great Recession, is a headline that I read yesterday in the Portland Business Journal. So we have a serious situation. that's unfolding on two fronts. And to that end, we have programmed this call to address both issues. I want to say that the whole of government approach really is working. You've probably heard that this is federally supported, state managed, and locally executed, and that's exactly how it's unfolding here. Just to quickly run through the agenda, today we'll start with an update.
Hi, folks. Ron here.
Ron Wyden, you can kick this call off. It's all yours.
Oh, my goodness. That sounds like Mike. Is that correct?
That is right. That is right. Good to hear your voice.
You too, friend. And I understand you may have some guy. I never met him, but I heard you might have some guy named Winkles involved in this, too.
Yeah, he's on the line somewhere. He tries to, fly under the radar for us, but he's one of our great advocates for the League of Oregon Cities on our intergovernmental relations team.
Well, I told him that I wouldn't let him go for just about anybody, but when Scott said that he wanted to work with LOC, I said that's the kind of thing that is a deserving and wonderful place to do good, and so we let him go. But we wouldn't let him go for just anything. And let me do this. Let me just give you all a couple of quick kind of thoughts, and then I understand, Mike, you've got some questions and all that kind of thing. The first is you cannot spell local without the letters LOC. So this is really a good time to zero in on on-the-ground challenges, and I particularly want to get your thoughts on how to make the federal government a better partner. I think it's pretty obvious that this is not a time for small ball. I mean, this is a time when we've got massive challenges that are going to take very, very substantial responses. And I thought I'd just take a minute to discuss the help that was really my priorities here in this recent battle. I'm the ranking Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee. I made it one of my top priorities to create the state and local stabilization fund. For Oregon, that's $1.6 billion for state and county stabilization. And we got these resources with the intent that they get into every nook and cranny in Oregon. I think a lot of the people who are listening know that I'd much prefer to have this conversation with you all in person. We've had 970 town hall meetings, and LOC members have been so great to always come out, and I'd much rather have this conversation in person. And to start it, I want everybody to understand that jurisdictions all across this state, all across Oregon, have COVID-related needs. I also pushed very hard for the Public Health and Social Services Emergency Fund. This is the fund that's going to help hospitals and nursing homes and doctors' offices and healthcare providers get financial resources to respond to the COVID crisis. And then, very important to rural Oregon, people often don't remember that most of Oregon is towns under 10,000 in population, and rural. We made sure that farmers and agribusinesses are eligible for the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program. We also have made it a special priority to make sure that the Small Business Administration Economic Injury Disaster Program is open to farmers and ranchers and wineries and hemp growers. And just this week I led a letter on that issue to the Small Business Administration. I do want to note that a lot of folks are having real challenges with the Paycheck Protection Program, and very soon after we've completed our call, I'll be on the phone with Secretary Steve Mnuchin for the second time talking about this, because particularly in a lot of small communities with small lenders, that paycheck protection money is just frozen. It's not getting out to small business folks. And I have just made it clear to the Secretary he has got to communicate to the small lenders who dominate our state that the federal government is backing up those loans with the full faith and credit of the United States. So if you can help us get that word out, that'll be important. One last word that I think a lot of the people who you all represent care a great deal about is what's happening with these unemployment checks. And we've got more than 17, well, I guess close to 17 million yesterday who are unemployed. The number goes up, so my guess is it's probably over 17 million today who just feel like they've been hit by a wrecking ball. And I put together, negotiated with the Trump administration, a program that finally starts to deal with this time warp that the unemployment system has been all about. It was created in the 1930s. Nobody ever heard of a gig worker back in the 1930s, and so I was able to negotiate with the Trump administration a program that would allow workers laid off with no fault of their own to get existing unemployment benefits plus $600 more per week each week for the next 4 months. Now, the states and our state employment office, they have the job of getting those checks out, and I have been pushing Secretary Scalia, the Department of Labor head, to do more to help the states get those checks out, because we have thousands of Oregonians right now in the many communities that you all come from that desperately need that money to pay rent and buy groceries and to pay for out-of-pocket medical. So that's a little bit about the effort to alleviate some of this economic pain that Oregonians are feeling, but nobody at LOC has to tell me at this point how much heavy lifting is still left to do. So I think, Mike, you're going to moderate a little bit, and you've got some questions that are coming in from good folks around the state, and so let's just go to some questions.
Thank you, Senator, very much for that. This was very informative, and you're right. This is unfolding minute by minute, and really there are a lot of uncertainties out there, but things are coming together slowly but steadily. The first question that we had was how local governments, you mentioned an economic stabilization fund. How can local governments really access those funds, and how can they use those funds? There hasn't been a whole lot of information about that at this point.
Here's where we are. The state gets $1.2 billion in CARES funding, and so the state essentially can distribute a portion of those funds to local governments. Now, Treasury has said that the funds will be dispersed to states no later than April 24th. And as I said, we've been told that Oregon is going to receive $1.6 billion from this fund. It's called the Coronavirus Relief Fund. The intent of the Congress was that states could either spend the money for the allowed purposes or distribute funds to local jurisdictions. Now, jurisdictions larger than 500,000, we know who that is in Oregon, jurisdictions larger than 500,000 people can apply to Treasury directly for their share of their state's allotment, equal to 45% of the ratio of the jurisdiction's population to the state population. Now, on Thursday, the Federal Reserve announced a new lending program for state and local governments, and this is called the Municipal Liquidity Facility, and it'll offer $500 billion in lending to states and municipalities. I don't think it does enough for smaller counties and cities in any way, shape, or form in terms of amount, and I think the loan for a lot of small communities is really, an eye kind of roller. So that's just kind of, Mike, a general take on it, and we can talk a little bit more about how local governments can access the funds next, if you'd like.
Fantastic. That's great. And I appreciate you taking the time to answer that question. I wonder, do you have great hopes for this fourth stimulus package that is being discussed, and in terms of being able to fill some of maybe the oversights that happened in the previous three, in terms of being able to get funding to communities that are, less than 500,000 and some of the gaps that were left by the previous three?
Let me tell you where we are, because the Congress said in CARES that state and local municipalities need help, weathering this, economic wrecking ball. I told you it wasn't enough. That's why the Fed is going to go forward with this lending package. But I think we need to do more than that. And so Senator Heinrich of New Mexico is working on a version of a coronavirus community relief act, which would provide $250 billion in stabilization funds for smaller cities and towns. I'm very much interested in that. I'm working closely with him on this bill. I know that a lot of local governments are following this legislation. Senator Heinrich wanted to partner with us in particular because the Senate Finance Committee where I'm the ranking member, will be involved in the negotiations on this, and I'm going to push hard for what Senator Heinrich is talking about, and actually intend to bring it up with Secretary Mnuchin. We've talked several times in the last few days, and I'm going to push this very hard with him because he's a key member of the Trump administration negotiating these efforts.
Outstanding. And I know you're time limited here. Do you have time for one live question from the audience?
Yeah, sure. And let me just do one other thing, and that is give people a sense of the COVID for assistance bill and what the timing is on it. Work is already underway on a fourth COVID-19 package. I mean, the challenge is sort of twofold. I'm sitting at my desk in the Dirksen Senate office building where I've had the good fortune of having you come and visit before. The challenge is to work out the kinks in the CARES Act, make sure local governments, in the instance of what we're talking about, get the funding they're eligible for. And so we're doing two things. We're trying to put together the next package and get suggestions that I can take to the negotiating table. And everybody who's listening ought to know that they're going to hear more about the bill with Senator Heinrich, the Coronavirus Community Relief Act, over the next week or so. And what I've been saying, and will say again with Secretary Mnuchin, is local governments have been on the front lines of this response, and local governments of all sides need to be eligible for assistance they need in the next package.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Thank you. I can't even imagine. You're doing such an amazing job for us, and what a great champion. If you have time for one question, I have.
Sure.
Councilor John Goodhouse from Tigard on the line right now, and he wanted to ask something economic-oriented, I believe, John, right?
He is a good guy, and I would be happy to hear the voice from Tigard.
Hi, thank you, Senator. A two-part question. One part of the payroll protection program is how can businesses that don't bank with any of the banks that are offering the program, how can they get the check protection program? And a second, what will be done in the future bills for landlords and commercial building owners with the evictions and no pays that are being passed by states?
Let me do the second question first. I think a lot of those small landlords and people who are getting evicted, that's going to be one of the key questions, because, I mean, we just saw April 1st, come, and there's going to be another month, ahead, and we're going to have layoffs and people not able to pay rent. And we're talking in Oregon about a lot of small buildings and owners who are on tight margins and the like. So this will be something that we'll be negotiating on over the next few days. I, for one, think that there's got to be more to help the tenants, pay these bills. And if the tenants can pay the bills, then you don't have the same crunch for the owners of the building. So it's a question of what's the best and most direct way to deal with the problem. And it seems to me helping these tenants in a lot of these instances where they're of modest means, you help them, and then you're able to deal with them not being evicted because the landlord knows that there's money coming in. In other words, it's much like what I was talking about with respect to helping workers, with lost wages. They can pay rent, they can buy groceries, they can buy the goods and services that keep the economy humming, and that's what allows small businesses to say, hey, we'll use this employee retention credit that Ron wrote, and we'll be able to keep our workers on. So that's the way I think we all understand markets work, and that was what I was trying to do with the sort of bringing the unemployment system into the 21st century and getting help for workers, and at the same time having those credits for small business. I was asked something about patient protection. I think I got something about banks and not being able to find somebody who would assist. I'd like to have the staff that's there get more details, offline. But what I will be telling you is that in a few minutes, I'm going to tell Secretary Mnuchin again that the single biggest problem I'm hearing from Main Street, Oregon, on the Paycheck Protection Program is that the small lender, and we've got a lot of them, as you all know better than I, is just kind of paralyzed right now. They're trying to figure out how to deal with this program where the federal government really hasn't been clear in terms of the rules and the like, and so money is just frozen. And the Department of Treasury needs to tell the small lenders, hey, we're backing you up with the full faith and credit of the United States. By the way, it sure seems that the big banks are doing really pretty well under this program. It's the small banks that are having problems, and that will be a topic for another day, because sometimes you look at this administration and they seem to be pretty comfy with the big guys who can figure out what loans they want to make and what loans they don't want to make, and the small businesses and the small lenders are stuck in sort of, bureaucratic, ice buckets trying to figure out how to unfreeze credit. So that's something we ought to do offline.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Okay.
Well, Senator, this is Mike again. I know that you have to get on a call here in a very few minutes, and I want to thank you for your time. Did you want to close with anything before you run?
I have a lengthy closing address, Mike, and it's just thank you to LOC for all of what you all do. You have members, I gather, listening on this call, and members, I think, know, and I often joke about this at town meetings, that you're lavishly compensated if you're on the city council in a small community. And then everybody kind of looks at me and says, what planet is Ron from? You're doing this work because you want to help local government and local communities and the LOC part of local government. So that's my closing address. Thank you, and we're going to try and get you more tools to do the good work that you're doing.
Wonderful, and thank you. Your audience today is about 350 people right now from all across the state of Oregon, so your message resonates, and we thank you so much for your service, for everything that you're doing, and for being in constant communication with us. It's making this much easier to move through as a team. So thank you, Senator, very much.
We'll put this as not ending the discussion, but to be continued.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you so much, Mike. I actually definitely do all work for you. And so don't hesitate to send me emails, but it's been a great partnership with the League, and just appreciate being on this call the last couple of Fridays, especially on this Holy Friday, to be able to bring you all up to speed on the latest. And it was great to hear Senator Wyden and William. Everybody has just really been working together in spite of everything to just get resources out. So I'll just start with my last conversation with William this week that we had. And we sent a letter to the president to specifically ask the president to stand in support and go on the record of directly requesting money to local governments regardless of a population threshold. There are only 36 cities in the U.S. with a population of more than 500,000 residents, and that represents only 14% of the country's total population. So approximately 283 million people live outside of those 36 cities that will receive direct funding from the CARES Act through the Coronavirus Relief Fund. Our hope is that we will see guidance from Treasury next week, so we'll know exactly how those funds for every community or every local government below 500,000 will get dispersed. But we didn't want to go without asking the president specifically to go on record, just given the involvement and level of engagement that the White House has had with state and local governments. And I think the reason that we did that, or I know the reason that we did that, is I saw the headline, if you ask, you shall receive, and that's exactly what happened with how the Senate ended up bringing a relief bill for small businesses to the floor. And so it just, I feel like we as cities have been screaming from the rooftops for weeks now. And so we wanted to go on record to send that request to the president. And so we look forward to hearing, and if William's still on the phone, William, I'd love to hear from you saying that the president is going to go on record and request money directly to local governments. The other point that we wanted to make is, and I understand that there are some administrative challenges with getting relief out to local units of government of all sizes. The reality is that there is a 50,000 threshold that smaller communities can directly access funding through community development block grants. But the U.S. Department of Agriculture gives out funding to communities less than that, and they do that year-round. So we know it can happen, and we know that there's a will. We just need to work with Congress to put that way into legislative text so we can make that happen in this fourth stimulus bill. In the meantime, because of your advocacy and the advocacy of local governments across the country, this week we were able to get a bill introduced in the House called the Coronavirus Community Relief Act, which will allow units of local government to use allocated funds to cover losses. Again, this Relief Act will allow local governments to use allocated funds to cover revenue losses. So that we aren't just restricted to necessary expenditures as was incorporated into the into the CARES Act. In addition, this Coronavirus Community Relief Act would provide the flexibility on how those allocated funds could be used. So, for example, if one city needed more funds than that is allocated, while another city doesn't need all of its allocated funds can be reallocated among cities within a state to ensure that those funds are put to their best use, and that's a change from the CARES Act. And lastly, this Relief Act changes the rule regarding when a city, town, or village must certify in order to receive the funds, basically eliminating the shot clock so that cities, towns, and villages can apply for that money when they are able to. And so far, that bill was introduced. Representative Negus of Colorado is the lead writer on that, and we worked with him on it. Blumenauer, DeFazio, and Bonamici have all signed on as co-sponsors. The reason I'm going at length to share this with you today is because we could definitely use Representative Greg Walden to join as a co-sponsor. We want to make sure that this bill is as bipartisan as possible. Also, Senator Wyden mentioned that Senator Heinrich of New Mexico will be working with him on this bill. That was news to me, so I'm excited. I was jumping up and down to hear that the Senate will be introducing a House version of this bill. And I think if that happens and we're able to build strong bipartisan support, we will be able to see this in the next bill as it's moved. There is another bill by Representative Snyder that will be introduced next week on the 14th that would allow governmental employers to be eligible for tax credits for providing emergency sick leave and paid leave for employees. As some of you will remember, state and local governments were left out of that, so we have that bill. A couple of other things I just want to flag for you. We also have been working hard on the issue of housing instability and homelessness, and we are working with our coalition partners to put together a comprehensive request for additional relief for homeless assistance programs, moratorium on evictions, as well as additional funding for emergency rental assistance. And so stay tuned for more on that. We'll post that up on our site, and we'll send that to the League once we have it. Also, I want to say that HUD has released the allocation of levels for community development block grant funds to local governments under the CARES Act, but we're still waiting on HUD to publish their regulatory interpretation of the law and any waivers of existing requirements. And HUD has been having weekly calls, and they've been awesome at getting information out as soon as possible. Just one last thing, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mike. I just want to flag for you all regarding telecom. Many of you may have received a form letter from your residents asking for a moratorium on small cell construction during the emergency. As of now, none of the federal requirements for wireless review, including a prohibition on moratoria, have been suspended. So cities are still expected to complete permitting processes within the normal time frames. However, some cities have been able to successfully, proactively work with local providers to voluntarily extend those timelines or prioritize certain key projects if they're facing staff capacity challenges. Also, just want to flag for you that players in the wireless industry are actively seeking to use this emergency as a way to achieve their long-term preemption and deregulatory goals. You should communicate with your state league, with the Oregon League, and with NLC if there are any red flags on this issue, and really just keep a close eye on state legislation. We have really been working and keeping our eye to manage any preemption efforts during this critical time. So I'll stop there, other than just to say that I think it's important as national news stories start to get reported about what the financial impact of COVID is on your respective budgets. I know many communities now are having to furlough employees. I think it's important to just tell your story and share your reality, because we are fighting here in Washington for all of the resources with the maximum amount of flexibility, but we need to tell that story, and this really needs to be a bipartisan effort in order for us to seek the true financial economic relief that you will need to see in order to stay financially solvent. So I'll stop there, and I'll just turn it over to you, Mike.
Irma, thank you very, very much, and I'll see you in about an hour for another briefing with all the state leagues, I think. So thank you again for your tireless work. I got to move now quickly to Sarah Bedreau, who's our partner with OHA, Oregon Health Authority, for a quick update. She's got a call that collides at 11. So with that, Sarah. Okay. Sarah's not in presenter mode, apparently. If I could then move to the governor's office right now, either Alana or Leah. Are you on the phone?
Hi, this is Leah. Can you hear me?
Hi, Leah. Yes, thank you for joining.
Yes, good morning. I will be really quick. Just a few updates on kind of what we've been up to this week. I think the big announcement was around school closure and going to distance learning for the remainder of the school year. There's been additional guidance that's been put up on the education website around kind of what that looks like. And as they're working through additional guidance on that, they'll be coming out with more documents around that. I know that we've been fielding a lot of questions for virtual graduations and are there alternative things that we could start looking at, and we are having a lot of those conversations as well. The other thing that we've been paying really close attention to, and I think all the other presenters have talked about it, is the PPP. The governor had calls with Oregon's largest banks and credit unions this week to see how the rollout was going. And I think, as everybody has alluded to, the volume is just overwhelming. And while these loans are starting to get funded, there's a little bit of a lag in how that's actually occurring. And then we also heard quite a lot about the number of individuals who don't have the banking relationships and how do they get on a list that's not at the bottom of the queue. Where we have seen this week the SBA has put out kind of a call for other financial institutions to be certified through the program, which sounds like they're doing on an expedited basis. So hopefully that will help alleviate some of the pressure. Another topic that we've been working on this week and hope to have more information about next week is the impact to rural hospitals. That's something that we're paying, again, very close attention to and trying to figure out if there are other mechanisms that we as a state could be leaning into assist them a little bit more, knowing that they are getting direct allocation from the CARES Act supposedly this week, but still trying to figure out how to make sure that the rural hospitals stay operational. The other thing I'll just mention is that we're posting this afternoon additional guidance on the eviction moratorium for both commercial and residential. So there'll be a little bit more guidance that'll be coming out later today on that. And then finally, I know that we have talked a little bit about additional executive orders, and I don't have any significant updates, just to let you all know that we're still having conversations about what additional executive orders would look like, and knowing that there still is a significant need around that for local government.
Perfect. Leah, thank you so much. I appreciate everything that you're doing. I appreciate your work on the coronavirus Economic Recovery Task Force as well. I think there are some good things coming out of that group. It's a really interesting think tank from all perspectives, and I think we're going to get a lot of production once we get everything settled here. So thank you so much. Just a quick question, not to put you on the spot. Is it too early to announce potentially a call next week with the governor?
So we are hoping to get some time for cities to talk to the governor next week. We've had a couple of scheduling hiccups, so I'm hopeful that this afternoon I'll have more clarity on when that'll take place, but our hope is sometime next week. Okay, excellent. Well, I appreciate this, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing, the administration is doing. This is outstanding work, and I thank you so much for joining us today. I want to try to go back now to Sarah Bedreau with OHA. Lisa, I just texted you her number. If you could unmute that. We'll go to Sarah. There's a lot to talk about there from OHA. Sarah, are you there?
I think I am. Hi, can you hear me?
You are. We have you live. Okay.
Excellent.
So, Sarah Bedreau, without further ado, another one of our great partners from OHA. I know you have a lot to cover as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll provide some updates on the health aspects of the COVID-19 response. First, I wanted to start by acknowledging that this weekend is Easter weekend, and there are many other religious observances coming up as well. OHA yesterday published some guidance for faith communities and for faith leaders to support them in continuing to hold these very, very important events in ways that preserve social distancing and keep people safe. So I just want to let you know that is available. If you have safe leaders in your communities, you can go ahead and find it on the OHA coronavirus website. And I wanted to provide a little update on testing and personal protective equipment, as these are questions that we're getting asked a lot right now. Starting with personal protective equipment and, how are we doing with getting supplies out to people who need it? I can tell you that the state of Oregon and its response has shifted to a method where all supplies are pushed out to counties and tribes through county and tribal emergency managers. So rather than holding the supplies at the state, supplies are immediately pushed out to the areas of the state. Part of this also is OHA collecting information on how quickly different areas of the state are going through these supplies. And so that gives us really big visibility into where the need is and, flexibility to move things to where need is greatest. If you want to know what that looks like for your own county, you could, or for your city, you could connect with the county emergency manager. And in terms of testing, we're getting a lot of questions about the overall testing strategy. And what I can tell you today is that state leaders are working right now on developing that ongoing and long-term testing strategy. So how do we make sure that tests are in place and that people are able to access them more readily and in all areas of the state? Today we know that the Oregon State Public Health Lab continues to do testing for priority cases. So, that includes people that are hospitalized, as well as making sure that our healthcare workers can quickly get back to work. The majority of testing is happening through commercial labs or labs within healthcare systems at this point in time. And then also, Oregon has received from the federal government a very small number of rapid testing machines. I think this is probably just the beginning, but we were able to position these rapid testing machines in areas of the state that really don't have those big health systems that are able to do testing. So getting these positioned in areas of the state to make sure, that quick access to testing is available in more areas of the state. And then finally, I think one of our themes is data. So Oregon Health Authority keeps adding to the data that is available publicly on the OHA coronavirus website. As of yesterday, we were reporting 1,321 positive cases and 44 deaths. That information continues to be updated daily. But I encourage you to go look at what is available. It might be able to answer a lot of the questions you have or that you're hearing. We're able to show information about hospital capacity, hospital bed capacity, ventilator capacity, as well as weekly data reports that show what we're seeing in terms of risk factors or cases by race and ethnicity. This data is going to be very important. It helps us understand the situation in Oregon right now, and it's really critical to thinking about how we start working toward, resolution and moving out of our current situation. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
A lot of good information there, Sarah, and I appreciate you hanging on the line with us. I know you have a call that just started at 11, so if you need to go, we understand that. I'm working to tighten the agenda going forward and also look for a more stable platform for the folks that call in. We have over 350 on the line today, and I've heard from a number of them that this is an unstable connection, that they've been dropped from the call. So we'll be looking to improve what we can do there as well. So thank you so much for your time, Sarah. If there are questions, I'll ask again for folks to email me, and I avail myself to you, as always, to be a resource if you need to get in direct contact with our members, the state leaders, and city leaders. We're happy to facilitate in that effort as well. So thank you so much. All right, I want to move now to pivot back to the economic side of things. Our next speaker is from the Small Business Administration. Jeremy Field is the Regional Administrator for the SBA. He's responsible for the whole Pacific Northwest region, which encompasses Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. He has really got his finger on the pulse of probably what many of you are thinking. And after Jeremy, I will open it for Q&A because I know this is a hot topic with all of you. So, Jeremy, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can, absolutely.
Perfect. Sorry, I got an incoming call here from another, lending institution. But I'm really glad to be here today. For everyone on the call, anyone that I'm sure some of you have a lot of small businesses in your community. Well, not in your communities, but personally, we know how the small businesses have needed this money. Not yesterday, a week, but 2 weeks ago. We've been working really hard to try to get this to everybody as soon as we can. So the great struggle we have is that we are essentially building a plane while we're flying it. If any of you were paying attention a couple weeks ago when we first rolled out disaster loans when states were getting those declarations, our website was pretty clunky. Our Office of Disaster Assistance is amazing. They are on the ground when a disaster occurs, like Puerto Rico or Houston. They set up dozens of spots in a centralized area for people to come, and it's great. They walk people through loans, and they're very efficient. But what we didn't really need was that great of a portal, because a lot of times in these areas, first of all, it's a smaller location, but a lot of times infrastructure is down. People would rather go talk to a person about the loans. Obviously, we can't do that with this pandemic. It would not be a safe way to do it. And the only tool we had was that portal, and it just didn't have the infrastructure. Think of the SBA as a very reliable tugboat. We help businesses to start, to grow, expand into new markets, and obviously now recover from disaster. Everyone knows about that now. So when people were getting on and we were having millions of applications a day, it just wasn't working. So we partnered with a private industry to, as of March 30th, people could apply for a disaster loan in 5 minutes if they had all the information there. And we can process 2,000 loans per second, and that means that we could process every single small business in America in 4 hours if they wanted a disaster loan. So we went from a tugboat and we built an aircraft carrier, because the aircraft carrier is what this crisis demands. Now, 2 Fridays ago, the Congress passed the CARES Act. That very Friday, our team began writing rules and regulations from that legislation. They worked late nights over the weekend. And on Monday, we sent that in. The Monday after the bill was passed, we sent those rules and regulations to OPM. And as alluded to earlier, it's a process. It typically takes at least 30 days because you have to publish on the Federal Register and you have to ask for comments. Well, we decided we weren't going to wait for that because people needed money now. So we started rolling out the Paycheck Protection Program with our lenders. It was the same situation. We have a system that lenders use to, get these guarantees from the SBA so that when they give out an SBA loan, they're protected because it's usually a little bit higher risk. People don't have the same traditional capital they need. Long story short, that E-Tran system also, we thought it was going to be strong enough to handle the workload, but it wasn't. And so when it went live Friday, we started working overtime. We found another incredible private partner who built a new E-Tran system. The first day we had loans that were going through the PPP, we had 400 lenders online at the start of the morning. By the end of the day, we had 847, and today we have over 4,000 lenders. I want to make sure I share this, the stats with you. As of last night, we had given out 570,000 loans, and those loans accumulated up to $145 billion with 4,155 lenders participating. Now, even though we were able to make a much improved portal, there have been people that have been being kicked off or suspended from this E-Tran system. And honestly, I have not been given feedback as to why that's been the case. We have been sending in every institution we hear from. We have sent that on to our Office of Capital Access. I imagine that they're just swamped. as we all have been, trying to answer questions and get things working. But I don't have an update as why it's happening. I can just tell you it is, and we're addressing it. We're aware of those situations, and we're still building that aircraft carrier, right? So it's going to get there. We are already having success. There are small businesses who have already received their paychecks through the PPP program, and they're hiring their people back and getting them the money they need to stay home and be safe and lower the bell curve that we're all paying attention to. So just to explain a little bit, with the PPP and the EIDL loans, which are the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. So EIDL is disaster, the PPP is paychecks. That's the easiest way to remember about it. If you have a small business asking you, what should I do? If they need help with payroll, if they're mortgage or lease payments, or keeping the utilities paid, that is the Paycheck Protection Program. It's an 8 weeks. The funds last 8 weeks. The highest paycheck salary you can give an employee or an owner is $100,000. Cap's there, but it puts money in people's pockets. It gets the mortgage payments paid, and the lights stay on. And what it does for you as a small business person is you have 8 weeks to work with your team and figure out how you're going to move forward when things start to improve and doors start to open and customers start rolling back in. So that's that time. We've had some of our small business owners say, well, why are we paying people to stay home? And the answer to that is, we hope you don't just pay people to stay home. Do trainings, work on improving customer service, work on your standard operating procedures so that miscommunications in the past can be improved. This is a time for small businesses with the Paycheck Protection Program to sharpen their saw. And they're never going to have this again, where the federal government is paying them to keep their employees employed, and they have 2 months to improve their businesses. And all that time, we'll be able to collect more data, and our federal and state policymakers, as well as our healthcare professionals, can determine where we come out of it with all that time and all that data. So it's an amazing program. We know it's not going as fast as we want or as demand dictates. But what I can tell you is there have been very long nights and very long weekends, sleepless nights for leadership as we have gone about figuring out how to handle these very complex problems in a short manner of time. So while I fully recognize that small businesses are hurting, and we know that, you can take comfort in the fact that the SBA has worked hard and long to improve our processes, and we've gone from a tugboat to aircraft carriers, and now we're tweaking those aircraft carriers to make them better. So with that, I can turn the time back over to you, and if or maybe if my district director Marty Golden would like to speak, he's the face of the SBA in Oregon, but we're here to answer any questions or take your comments or concerns.
Outstanding. And I really appreciate you hanging on the line with us. I know that there are likely some questions. If you don't mind, Lisa, can we put us into question and answer mode real quick and see if there's anybody out there that has questions? Thank you. If you do have a question, the operator's giving you instructions. You can get into the queue and virtually raise your hand, and we'll be happy to unmute you for those questions. Anyone with a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. This is Remy Drabson with the McMinnville City Council. One of the things that we're already starting to see in our community is the inequitable access to these loans, specifically to communities of color. Sorry, my foster dog is howling in the background. Because of a traditional lack of access to the banking system, we have both nonprofits and minority-owned businesses in our area, specific to Latinx-owned businesses, that don't have traditional banking relationships and therefore aren't having the same access to these loans, either because other small banks aren't providing the loans or because they're not existing customers, and banks are only making these loans. Some banks are only making these loans available to existing customers, and so that's my question. It sounds more like a statement.
Mark or Jeremy? Okay, maybe more technology issues again. We may have lost. Now? Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
I got unmuted, so that worked out perfect.
Okay.
So that's a great question. We have heard that before. Especially, you'll be glad to hear from your leadership in Oregon. What we really can tell you is that, while this does happen and we don't pretend it doesn't, you can contact us at the SBA if you call the Portland office. You can contact any of our small business development centers, our women's business centers, as well as our SCORE chapters around the state. These professionals know how to assist small businesses, and they'll be able to get them to lenders who will work with them. Another thing that the SBA has done is recognized how quickly fintech could help this situation and many other Americans. And so fintech is another wonderful tool that you can use to get in touch with lenders who are good at getting money to businesses quickly. And they've been authorized to execute the Paycheck Protection Program as well. So there are options. If they need help, send them to us. We will work with them and help them find a lender that will help them with this process.
This is Marty Golden. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I just got unmuted, so somehow I wasn't able to get through before. I'd just like to amplify what Jeremy's saying. We know that that's an issue. We have resources around the state, but admittedly they're heavily distributed in the Portland area. There's a non-bank lender called Craft 3 that generally does loans to more of the underserved community. They're eligible to do PPPs. There are other lenders that we're trying to get in. One thing that we are seeing, to your point, is that a lot of the banks initially are sticking to their own customers. And I think that's because there's such an overwhelming volume and the guidance was being developed and they thought it was easier to stay with their existing customers before opening it up. But we are seeing and expect to see more and more banks as they start running through the volume, taking on people who are not already customers. I can't favor any individual bank, but I can tell you that KeyBank in particular is trying to take on people who haven't historically been customers. And so as the volume goes up and down, they'll close the portal for people for a while and then they'll open it again at a later time. But I believe that right now if you open up some sort of an account with them, you become eligible to put in an application for the PPP. And as Jeremy mentioned, there's also SBDCs and SCOREs all over the state who can help people try to find those lenders. And we are getting more and more lenders. We've had 7 credit unions or 7 institutions as of 2 days ago who have been added to the system, and that process is continuing.
Okay, I hope that helps answer that question. I have one that was emailed in previously that I'll ask. It's from Stephen Tripp, the mayor from the city of Mitchell. He asks, we have small businesses which have applied for a stimulus loan and haven't heard anything back. Is there more than one program to apply through? Do you know the approximate turnaround on applications? Where or how do we get reimbursed for expenditures due to the virus? There looks like 3 layers to that question.
Well, and can everyone hear me?
They can, yeah. They're on listen-only mode.
Wonderful. So that's a great question. The turnaround times have admittedly changed. The situation's been very fluid. Originally, we thought we were going to have turnaround times from 3 to 5 days on the disaster loans. And the great challenge there is that we have not received any more appropriations for the disaster loans since the beginning of this crisis. We have our typical loan amount. And so there's been a lot of questions as to how do we handle this situation, all happening inside our Office of Capital Access, and Office of Disaster Assistance. How do we do this? And those funds, some people have already received funding. So there's been a pretty steady flow of funding with more coming today. All I can tell you is that the Office of Capital Access and the Office of Disaster Assistance have been keeping that information close to the vest and have shared with us, not a lot of the internal processes of how that works. So all I can tell you is that I know that they have a very strong challenge in this. And the same goes for the Paycheck Protection Program with banks. There are questions on both sides. I told you we wrote those regulations in a day. Or in a weekend. The next week we were already amending processes as we looked at some of the gray areas of the initial regulations we put out. A lot of these things happen in coordination with Treasury. So our Office of Capital Access is also going back and forth with Treasury, explaining how we normally do things, and Treasury having their 2 cents in. It's been a challenge. There's just nothing easy about it. It's a challenge on our end with policy, writing new regs. It's a challenge that we put on our banking community, who never asked to be the means of supplying a social safety net, but they are so willing to help. They just have really good questions that they should be asking. And we've been developing policy around that. Initially, we asked them for a 5-day turnaround on loans. Some people have been getting their paycheck protection loans in that time, but now we're asking if they can do it within 10. Still, some of our lenders say that's not enough time. There's just a huge demand on the shoulders of these lenders. And all I can tell you is that they're working as hard and as fast as they can. We're doing the same thing on our end. Again, it's a challenge building a plane as you fly it, and it's just none of it's fast enough. We know that. We just know that we're making our best effort at this, and we'll get those funds to people as soon as we can.
Thank you so much for that, gentlemen. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Sure. Of course.
Okay. Next caller, please. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi, this is Council President John Goodhouse Tigard. One thing with the EIDL loans, I haven't heard of anyone. I've talked to people that have been part of calls across the country and haven't heard of anyone getting that money yet, but it says when you fill it out, you'll get it in 3 days. Do you have any updates on what's going on with that, or when anyone will get any of the EIDL money?
Yeah. People are receiving those funds. We're getting that feedback both from headquarters and just anecdotally from people letting us know that they're getting those funds. More of them will be getting more of those funds today. Again, the biggest challenge with EIDL is that we started with an initial appropriation, and unlike when we got that $349 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, we didn't receive any additional funds for our EIDL loan program. And that's something that our congressional leaders in the White House are looking at. It's also, I think, a little bit of the reason why we've been slow to respond to questions about that, because those ongoing conversations with policymakers as to what do we do with this program with the limited amount of funds we have, but the high demand that's there. So I know that they are going to work to they are going to send out more funds today. In fact, I'm pretty certain that they intend to distribute as much as they can today, is what we've been told internally. So the questions are still out there. I, like you, am waiting for the answers, and I wish I had them. But yeah, it's a dynamic problem, and it's we're all waiting for those answers.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, I'm told we're out of time, and I know we have several more in the queue. To you in the queue, I apologize. If you would, again, take the time to email me these questions, I'll make sure that I direct them directly to Mark and Jeremy and get those answered for you. So With that, I want to thank you both for taking the time. This is a key topic. I think we could spend a whole hour on this. But unfortunately, I have one more presentation, and we're almost at the bottom of the hour. So thank you both for your time.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And with that, I want to go to the Office of Emergency Management here in Oregon and talk to our friend Sonia McCormick. And thank you for waiting patiently. We, again, over-programmed this call. There was a lot of great information, but just too much information almost. So with that, I want to go to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be on the call. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm Sonia McCormick, the Public-Private Partnership Program Manager for Oregon Office of Emergency Management. So I am hosting daily calls with Idaho, Alaska, and Washington to share information of what we're seeing in our state, strategize any issues, and go from there. Also hosting weekly regional grocer calls. So these calls involve Idaho, Alaska, and Washington state as well. And that's where we highlight any gaps in communications or any supply chain issues. And as we know, extra buying, some illness, and hourly differentials and shortages did create some gaps that we were seeing of limited to no stock of some items, particularly paper items. But we're working on that. I'm also hosting a weekly Oregon-only grocer call that's really targeted to our Oregon partners with a supply chain forecast planning team. So we're looking at 2 to 6 weeks out and strategizing if we see any issues. In addition, I'm circling back and hosting weekly calls with tribal and county emergency managers to discuss any supply chain issues that I'm seeing and what they're seeing and how their county and tribe is doing. And then we're all talking about what we can do to help. So I think that there's some really great partnerships being made. We're doing a lot of communication, and I think it's going well. Thank you for having me.
Outstanding. And we are now at the bottom of the hour at 11:30, and we're going to wrap this call up. As always, we'll have the audio available on our website if you want to go back and refer to any of this. Otherwise, I made a commitment to get information to you, all of you, about the weekly calls with the White House if you're interested in that as well. And with that, I want to wrap this call up and thank you all very much for being on here. We will do it again next week. And again, I would advise you to keep abreast of what the LOC is doing. I think we are planning a call with the governor. It'll be just with the governor for an hour for city leaders. And we're planning that for some time next week. So thank you all for joining. Keep leading. Stay home. Stay safe. We are making a difference, and we really appreciate your leadership. Have a great weekend.